It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. We're back in the Windy City for our favorite investigative journalist from the independent news service, Carl Kolchak. Yes, this episode of Monster Mondays is back at it with two more episodes from 1974's Kolchak, the Night Stalker. In these two episodes, we meet a politician who might just have sold his soul for his meteoric rise on the national scene, and the spirit of a Native American shaman who also happens to be a murderer. We're also going to see some recognizable guest stars make their appearances as the main antagonists for our old buddy Kolchak. So let's just get right into it, shall we? In episode 7, called The Devil's Platform, Kolchak ponders the strange bedfellows that politicians will make as they are on the campaign trail, as well as once they are in power. He says looking back on the events he was just a part of, he soon found the strangest and perhaps most terrifying bedfellow of them all. And as the story begins proper, Kolchak is about to cross paths with Illinois State Senate candidate and current odds-on favorite to win the election, Robert W. Palmer. But Palmer, played by Tom Skerritt, recognizable film star to be Tom Skerritt, because in a few years after this, he'll be an Alien. And then he would basically take off and be pretty recognizable throughout the rest of his career. But he's not the virtuous man that his campaign would like you to believe. Palmer's campaign manager looked into his past constituency in the town of Dantonville and discovered that he was a criminal. Palmer took bribes, paid for his campaign through laundered money, you name it, he did it. Basically, he was a crook and a pretty bad guy. Now, that campaign manager would soon be dead as the elevator he was traveling in would come crashing down from the floor that their campaign offices had started at. And when Kolchak snaps pictures of the people inside the elevator, there is a scary big black dog that barks at him and runs off and away into the building's parking garage. Now, that dog ultimately begins to follow Kolchak through the streets of Chicago. And it also appears in a picture that Kolchak took when he developed, but disappears before anyone else could see it. Elsewhere, Robert Palmer is not at his scheduled televised debate against the incumbent state senator. Meanwhile, Kolchak goes to Tony Vincenzo, his editor, his embattled editor, I guess you could call him, to discuss the odd circumstance around Palmer's recently killed campaign manager and the deaths of various other Chicago politics bigwigs and donors in the recent weeks. A sweet little old lady who works at the INS has recently returned from a trip to Italy, and she's brought back gifts for everyone, including a little bottle of holy water for Kolchak. Holy water that she says was personally blessed by Pope Paul VI. Kolchak begins uncovering information about Robert Palmer, and he first tries his wife, who is kind of cagey and only tells Kolchak that Robert is perfect, and if he wants any more information about her husband, that he'll probably just need to speak to him directly. And as he leaves, that scary black dog jumps out of nowhere and before taking off into the night. But when Kolchak comes face to face with Palmer, he is not going to grant the interview that Kolchak was hoping to get for INS. A few days later, Palmer goes to meet his deceased campaign manager's secretary, who attempts to blackmail him. Basically, when he finds out what she wants and what information she found out about Palmer from the campaign manager's things, in particular, the briefcase that he left behind that she was trying to get to him when the elevator doors closed, she is suddenly attacked by that big, scary black dog. The police saves her in time, and even one of the officers that shows up tries shooting the dog, but to no avail. And the officer who tried to shoot the dog tells Kolchak at the hospital that the dog seemed to almost enjoy being shot at. It didn't move while the cop shot 6 times at it. Later that night, the secretary dies while it appears that Palmer was in the hospital room with her. So later, another death occurs in a horrific head-on car accident which is the current state senator, James Talbot. So now it seems as though Robert Palmer is going to cruise to victory, and this will be the stepping stone for him to become a national powerhouse when it comes to politics. Now, obviously, Kolchak is quite suspicious of all of these deaths. After getting some old photos of Palmer from his original Dantonville area, Kolchak discovers a peculiar medallion around Palmer's neck, a pentagram. So Kolchak comes to the conclusion that Palmer has struck a deal with the devil to rise through the ranks of politics to eventually get to the presidency. So in our final act of this episode, Kolchak sneaks into Palmer's house. We learn that even Palmer's wife is not very happy with this agreement her husband has made. And as Kolchak sneaks around, he discovers there is an underground altar set up for Palmer's devilry. He catches Palmer in the act of praying to the devil, and naturally Palmer already knows that Kolchak is there snooping around. So Palmer dresses down Kolchak and basically reveals all the things that Kolchak secretly, or maybe not so secretly, wants out of his career, to basically try to seduce the reporter over to work with Palmer and get as little or as much of that Kolchak could possibly want. But if Kolchak declines, Palmer plans to kill him and as a sacrifice to the devil. As Palmer chases Kolchak in his black dog form, Kolchak is able to snatch the amulet off of the dog's neck and then puts it into holy water that he got from the kindly old lady. And as the medallion dissolves, the dog becomes passive and friendly. It also doesn't change back into Palmer. Palmer is never seen again, and one of the things that's reported that Kolchak says that's kind of funny says that he's thought to have been kidnapped or killed by radicals. He doesn't go any further into that. I like that. But Mrs. Palmer has also disappeared, and Kolchak hopes that she has gone off into obscurity and that she is accompanied by a friendly, loyal dog by her side to basically keep her company and treat her the way that she should be treated. Episode 8 is called Bad Medicine. Now, in this episode, Kolchak first talks about the high-class people of Chicago. He says they're not really any different than the high-class people in New York or in LA. They just live in Chicago. And one of these high-class residents of the Windy City is a woman who made her millions in women's undergarments. And she had quite the taste for jewelry. She has like a very large diamond pendant. And as she relaxes after a long day, a bird breaks in through her window and turns into a Native American shaman, played by Hollywood tall man Richard Kiel. Yes, Jaws from the James Bond movies in a few years after this episode. But he takes her necklace and basically slits her wrist. In another apartment, a high-class woman of Chicago comes home to find her dog killed by a coyote, who then transforms into that shaman, who takes her jewels and also kills her. Now, due to the circumstances of these women's deaths, they were ruled as suicides, but Kolchak smells a stink about that official story. Neither woman fits the classic profile of being depressed and people who would ultimately commit suicide. In fact, their lives were actually getting improved through various means. One of the women was actually about to get even richer than she already was, so doesn't really seem to fit that profile. But soon he learns of a big deal going on at the gem exchange that has a ton of cops there to investigate the theft of a giant sapphire. And when the cops go inside, they find the guards dead and the place basically ransacked with diamonds all over the floor, which is interesting. Only one thing was taken from this, that giant sapphire. The thief wanted nothing to do with the smaller pieces, but the police canine is ultimately killed by some sort of an animal, which sounds like the coyote, and the police and Kolchak discover the shaman in the stairwell. Kolchak's flash on his camera temporarily blinds the shaman, and the gunfire from the police seem to disorientate him, but doesn't really stop him. The shaman goes to the roof and jumps off and disappears as if he simply flew away. A few things that Kolchak begins to realize around the suspicious facts of these cases are that the dead guard dog and the police canine, the guard dog of the rich lady earlier in the episode, and the police dog, were killed by a coyote. The bite marks were consistent with that of a coyote. Not something you would see in Chicago. The jewels stolen after passing over smaller gems indicate that this guy, this shaman, is a collector or knows exactly what he's looking for, and that all the deaths were indeed killed by their own hand. The 2 guards in the gem exchange was, after ballistics tests, were discovered to have been killed by their own guns. So the shaman, which Kolchak discovers is actually something that's called a diablero, can entrance victims to kill themselves and transform into a series of different animals to disguise himself to get away. Now, Kolchak tries to warn a major gem auction house that they are likely going to be the next target of that jewel thief that has been committing crimes all over Chicago. And this auction is not actually open to the press, and they try to basically usher Kolchak out, but come on, it's Carl Kolchak, so of course he's able to sneak around and stay nearby. Listening in through the door of where the major gems are being auctioned off, he hears the patio door smash open and he finds the Diablero in the room and everyone else dead. And he takes pictures of the Diablero, but is caught by a guard and is arrested, basically thinking that maybe he had something to do with the theft and or the dead people in this room. Now, after he's questioned and released, a woman at a museum in which he found out about the Diablero arranges a meeting with Charles Rolling Thunder for Kolchak. And at this meeting, Kolchak learns all about the Diablero, and it's explained that the flash on his camera actually hurts the Diablero because all of his power is wielded through his eyes, and it's how he entrances people, and when the flash of light went off, it incapacitated him. And Kolchak also learns that the only way to kill a Diablero is by showing him his own reflection. Now, in order to find the Diablero, Kolchak remembers something that one of the other reports at INS was being sent out about a high-rise which had a funding fallout, which caused only the first 5 floors to be finished of the 40-story building. Now, Diableros like heights, so it would make sense that the mostly empty and unfinished building would make for a good place for the Diablero to hide out, which he carries, so that he can carry out his dastardly deeds. Now, Kolchak planned to surprise the Diablero and show him his reflection in a mirror that he brought along with him, but he accidentally dropped that mirror, taking away his only defense and alerting the Diablero to his presence. Luckily, before being caught by the Diablero, Kolchak finds more mirrors that would have gone into the unfinished apartments and uses it to destroy the Diablero, and after gazing into his own reflection, the Diablero melts and ultimately fades into nothingness. The next day, nothing, not even ashes, were found on that floor. But the stolen gems, over hundreds of years the Diablero was collecting those trinkets, were also never recovered. It was almost as if they are just no longer part of this physical world. So let's talk about 3 things I like about these 2 episodes of Kolchak the Night Stalker. First, for the Devil's Platform, I really kind of like how just kind of creepy this is in a much more simplistic way. This doesn't have a big showy set of jump scares or a bunch of blood or anything like that, but there is an atmosphere to this episode that's really kind of carries it along. A lot of the episode takes place at night. That big scary dog is often in shadows. It also kind of pops up sometimes when you don't expect it to. Plus, the idea of like a devil hound and, like a hellhound or whatever, that's always kind of spooky. But there's an eerie calmness to Tom Skerritt. He's very smarmy in this, which is very much a Tom Skerritt thing. But it's not necessarily the most memorable of the Kolchak episodes, but the eeriness does play well for the series. It's also one of those episodes that has a little bit of an edge to it because really, if you think about it, Kolchak could at any moment become the target of Palmer as the poking and prodding and investigation carries on. Of course, Palmer knew that Kolchak was in his little altar room without Kolchak actually calling any attention to himself. So it would have been very easily at any point in time for Palmer to turn his attention onto this pesky reporter that's always hanging around. But I guess more than anything, it does also have a political feel to how it goes about the spooky stuff. It's not, it's basically a lot of backroom and unseen stuff that happens that helps Palmer get ahead, much like greasing palms and making strange bedfellows. So I just really like the tone and the mood of this episode. It feels very, there's a spookiness that's automatically kind of woven into it. Just by the way that it's directed, by the way it's shot, by the way things basically play out in it. Now, second, one of those things I really like about Kolchak the Night Stalker is that the series never really relied only on the typical monsters. Sure, there were werewolves and vampires throughout the first handful of episodes, but the series also did a lot of really interesting things with pulling in different monsters based on legends. Bad Medicine is the first of a few episodes dealing with Native American lore. Now, understand that this is a product of its time and therefore maybe not exactly as utterly sensitive as it might be handled today. After all, you do have Richard Keel dressed up like an Indian. But still, the series was interested in exploring other mythical and mystical concepts. Earlier in the series, there was voodoo involved to help a grieving grandmother get revenge on mobsters. Later in the series, there are more instances in which Hindu or Aztec concepts are woven into episodes. It creates the idea that there's a much, much bigger world of darkness under the surface of the world that we inhabit that goes beyond the typical movie-style monsters and beasts. This episode goes far enough for Kolchak to call upon a woman who works at a museum and an actual Native American elder to find out more about the Diablero. Diableros were real things, real mystical legends, mostly from Central America, and were known to be incredibly powerful and typically bad guys who use black magic and could transform into animals. So there was a show in Mexico called Diablero. In that show, the main character, Elvis Infante, is a Diablero and a demon hunter. So there is some reference starting point in mystical history that ties to this episode's main creature that is plaguing Chicago and Carl Kolchak. Third, also in Bad Medicine, there is a fantastic scene between Kolchak, that kindly old lady that I talked about in the Devil's Platform episode, Ron Updike, the uppity cultural and societal writer at INS, and Kolchak being on the phone. Now, he's trying to basically find the location of a gem auction that he's pretty sure is going to be attacked by the Diablero. So he calls Emily, the old lady, who also knows information about various cultural events around Chicago. And when she doesn't know the answer to the question about where this auction is going to take place, Kolchak has her, so remember, he's on the phone, so he's calling into INS. So he has her ask Ron, who is almost slavishly knowing these types of societal things. And she asks based on prompts that Kolchak is giving to her over the phone, but she's pretty good at spinning a yarn too. But the problem is she gets too complicated and detailed about what she's saying to Ron, which gets Ron on the phone to try to talk to a supposed colleague who Emily is claiming is the person who called her. Now, this forces Kolchak to use a second payphone while supposedly having Ron on hold, which he's just holding the other phone to his inside his jacket to his chest. And it's all that kind of classic misdirection and tiptoeing around lies and truths that is kind of a staple of old-fashioned comedy. It's perfectly executed, both by all the actors, one of which, of course, is not in the same place, and in a completely different location from the other two. But that really also plays to this excellent comedic editing in this episode to get the laugh. It's what makes Kolchak the Night Stalker a series that is a well-rounded piece of entertainment. Sure, you get some monsters, you get some spooks, you get some kind of tense moments, and you get some good characters. And all along the way, you're getting a few chuckles from those really good characters and those scenarios that are set up. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Mondays podcast at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube, where we also upload these episodes. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next week, it's time to take another trip to the Twilight Zone, and we're going to look at 3 very famous and memorable episodes: Living Doll, It's a Good Life, and The Hitchhiker. So until next week, stay spooky.